Is your magic meter running low? Well, we've got a cure for you. Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePauli, and today on the show I have an exclusive interview with Imagineer Mark Eades. Now, Mark has worked on many different projects for Walt Disney Imagineering, but in this interview I focus on two timely projects of his. With the recent opening of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland Park, I thought it would be fun to have an in-depth discussion about the original Star Wars attraction, Star Tours, discussing the process from beginning to end. In addition, this upcoming Sunday marks the 30th anniversary of one of the greatest Walt Disney Pictures live-action movies. Of course, I'm talking about none other than the epic Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So to celebrate, Mark and I discussed the Disney Parks attraction Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, which he was involved with during its early stages. I hope you enjoy this exclusive interview. Mark, thank you so much for having me over to you invited me to your home. Thank you. To record this podcast. Always appreciated when I'm welcome into someone's home, so thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome.
We are here to talk about your career at the Walt Disney Studios and Imagineering and such, and it's, there's a couple of specific projects I want to talk to you about, but let's just start at the beginning where you actually started at Walt Disney Productions in the mailroom.
Well, let's correct that. I actually started at Disneyland when I was going to college.
Oh, cool. What did you do at Disneyland?
Well, I started at River Belle Terrace. I was a busboy, eventually a dishwasher, became a cook, stayed there for 5 years, met my wife there. Then we got married, and we both transferred out of that place. And I went into Tomorrowland Attractions for 2 years. So 72 to 77 was River Belle, 77 to 79 was Tomorrowland Attractions. And then in the fall of 79, I transferred up to the Disney Studios and went into the mailroom, which is the classic film business beginning.
Nice. I didn't realize you started in the park. That's awesome.
Yeah. I had 21 years overall with Disney when you add it all up. I get a pension.
There you go. You're cast member for 21 years. Nice. So you started in the mailroom, but quickly went into the animation department as a PA?
Yeah. When you go into the studio back then, you went into the mailroom. There was no internet, so you delivered mail 6 times a day, interoffice mail, etc. We did runs. And then between times, we'd take what are known as rushes. Say somebody in Office A wants somebody in Office B to look at it. Well, you'd have to go pick up a copy of it and take it over to them for whatever reason. We weren't privy to that. We were also bonded, so when they needed big checks delivered someplace else, we would be the ones that would have to take them, and we would be driven by a transportation department. And this is because of all the unions. And then we also were the ones that delivered the call sheets for they weren't doing a lot of movies then, and the production reports. And we also would deliver scripts when the various iterations of a script would come out. And of course, since most of us were all graduates of schools, we'd all pour through the scripts and criticize them and all that. I was in the mailroom for a little over a year, and then originally I went into the animation department in late 1980 as a vacation substitute for the one gentleman who was the production assistant. They decided to leave me in animation as a PA. Basically, all you did most of the time was make sure there was plenty of the different paper they used, there must have been 40 varieties of pencils. Mm-hmm. You delivered any mail. All the mail for the animation guys, except for the higher end ones, came into our office, and then we would take it to them. And we had to make sure their time cards were done every Friday. There's a caricature of me upstairs. It was actually drawn by Tim Burton. I was wearing, of course, a Hawaiian shirt. And I'm holding an interoffice envelope, and I had a scowl on my face because I'd walk into these rooms with 4 to 6 of these guys and go, okay, which one of you is so-and-so?
Yeah.
And I saw Tim years later on the Warner Brothers lot where I was working on a project for Warner Brothers. And one of them was one of the Batman movies, the third one, the one with Val Kilmer, was in production. And we were looking at some of the sets to send them to the theme parks Warner's had at the time. And I'm on the set for The Riddler. with Jim Carrey and all of that. And I'm starting to walk out, and in walks Tim with his little entourage, and he stops and looks at me, and I look at him and goes, "Did I draw you once?"
Yes. I mean, how many
artists
years later was that? That's
years, and artists remember those things.
Wow. That's funny.
So, yeah, I was in animation, but it really wasn't the busy time. They were doing the Black Cauldron.
Yeah.
So most of the time, and apparently it was okay, I would be reading the Los Angeles Times from cover to cover and the Hollywood Reporter and the Daily Variety, and it was really slow. And the lady who was my boss from the mailroom, her name was Shirley Bench, God bless her, she came over to see me and says, "I think I found something for you that might be a little more suited for you." So she had me go out and meet a gentleman by the name of Ray DeLue, who was overseeing, was the manager of post-production for the Epcot project for all the films. And his office was in a trailer on stage 2, the Mary Poppins stage now, where they had mocked up all the different film formats. The whole stage was a projection facility, essentially. And they had a couple of editors working in a mocked up space made with film sets, just where they would get all the film coming in. And met with him, and he said, "Great, you're it." And so then I transferred over to the editorial department, cutting as they called it, got another bump. So in the course of 4 months, I got 2 bumps in my hourly rate.
Wow.
I was still in what's called we called it the OPU union, which was the clerical union.
Yeah.
So I hadn't made it into editing.
Oh, OPEIU, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
terrible.
Yeah, but I mean, it was a union.
Yeah.
It meant that when I went from Disneyland to the studio, I kept my seniority. So I was getting 3 weeks a year. I was already in the pension, such as it was. When you're making $2 or something an hour, and it's not a lot of money. And my pension from Disney is an average of my salary from day one to when I left.
Sure.
So it's, but it was kind of interesting. Yeah, they got jealous in my one summer in the mailroom. I was low man in terms of picking vacation times, but I blocked out a 3-week period, and the others got jealous. I had like 7 weeks on the books.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I went on to the Epcot project and was learning all kinds of things about film formats and film in general, not more technical stuff. And they were all getting close to done with the France film at that point.
Okay.
He had a few more things to shoot. After about 3-4 months, and I'd met the people from WED, we'd had to do a thing for Exxon, one of the sponsors. And I'd had to set up a thing. They'd made a special cut of one. There were like 4 films in the Energy Pavilion. And I set up a thing where they wanted to look at demo reels of 2 of them. And this was in 2 different areas of the stage, because Theater 1 was in one area because it was a different layout than Theater 2, which was another layout. Well, while they were in, I go, these guys are going to want to see everything. So I went ahead and set up so that if we needed to, we could show the other 2 films, rough that they were. So Exxon comes in, and they did a show and tell of the first 2 things, and then they were going to go off to lunch. And Randy Bright, who was the executive producer, and I'd met him, and Marty Sklar, who I'd met, go, "Well, it'd really be good if we could show the other 2 films. I don't know how long that would take. We might have to go to lunch and come back." And I said, "Can you give us 5 minutes, Randy? I've got him set up." Randy does one of these Randy Bright takes, and he goes, "What's wonderful about these projects is occasionally you meet someone who's really smart and thinks ahead for you."
Yeah.
I'm sitting there going, okay, I just embarrassed the executive producer, et cetera, by outthinking him, and didn't think anything of it. They went off and had their lunch afterwards. Randy came back and said, "Mark, you really did great. I was very impressed with you." "Okay, well, thank you. We'll have to do something about that." Well, whatever. John McLeod came over a few days later. The guy who was my boss at the studio, Ray DeLue, they approached me. They basically wanted me to take over post-production. Now, I'm a neophyte, and that probably didn't go over very well with Ray.
Yeah.
But I said, well, I'd have to think about it because, I'm here. And what's my future after this?
Yeah.
Because I knew that would anger the Disney gods at the studio.
Sure.
That WED had asked somebody else to take over because they weren't doing the job. At any rate, a couple of days later, Randy Bright shows up out of the blue. There was nothing on the schedule, no screening scheduled. And I have a desk where I answer the phone, I schedule the projection teams, etc. And he goes, Mark, can I talk to you for a minute? And of course, the assistant editors and the editors are like, outside. Oh, God.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So we go outside the west end of stage 2. There was an alleyway there. And he goes, I really was impressed with what you did. And I know John's talked to you, so I'm here to make a deal, basically. We want you to take over. We can't get rid of Ray, but you're going to run things from now on.
Wow.
Okay. So what's it going to take to get you to agree? And I'm sitting there, the gears are turning. Well, a raise. How's about $100 a week? That's a lot of money for me back then.
Sure.
We were pregnant. I'm going, yeah. And then he goes, what else? And I go, well, if I truly do what you're asking me, it's probably going to upset some apple carts here, and I'm going to be out of a job when Epcot opens. Maybe you guys could give me a year to come over to WED, give me a year, see what I'm capable of, and if it doesn't work out, you tell me I leave. So we shook hands. Nothing in writing.
Wow.
They actually went to Bob Jabot to get the raise. Bob wouldn't agree to it initially, so he went to Ron Miller and got me the raise.
Wow.
And then that was it. So we kept going, and 5 days before Epcot opened, we didn't have a print of Magic Journeys yet, and we got one that looked good. And I was told by Bob that, if this looks good, Mark, you're getting on a plane tonight with the print to take it to Florida and get it installed, because it has to run tomorrow night at 9 p.m. For everybody in Florida, including all the sponsor VPs and execs. So I called Donna. The print was good. I called her and said, I'm getting on a plane tonight. They actually got me 2 first-class tickets. One for me.
One for you and for the...
One for... Well, it's 70-millimeter film. It's not small, and it was a full thing times 2. There were no direct flights, of course, back then to Orlando. Mm-hmm. It's not the bus. It was busy, but not quite what it is now.
Sure.
And it was an interesting thing to change planes in Atlanta with 2 rolls of film that I had to hand carry. I was down in Florida. The next day after, 2 days later, I had my wife and my oldest son fly down. And on October 4th, I had to meet with Randy and Marty in Communicore in the hallway before we got on the flight home. And we talked about all the film issues that were still outstanding. And I literally said, I guess I'm a WED employee now, right? And Randy said, yep, it's all set up. See, so-and-so in professional staffing, they're going to do it as a transfer.
Wow.
Nothing in writing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So do you know what prompted that name change from WED Enterprises to Imagineering?
Well, it was WED Enterprises, and in 84 is when we went through the whole change to the new corporate CEOs. Michael Eisner and Frank Wells came in, and they were perplexed as to what we were.
Okay.
And a lot of people didn't know what WED Enterprises meant. Mm-hmm. It's an internal Disney. Nowadays, you could probably get away with it. But there was a lot of thinking that we needed to identify what the company was.
Okay.
It's like a branding, and Michael was thinking about it. By this was like 85 or so. He suddenly realized we could do some good stuff and started playing with us, I guess, and we started getting more projects turned on. Mm. And one of the things was he wanted to rename us, so I guess some people were hired to think about it. And, the name Imagineering stuck, and they said, okay, let's really say what it is. It's Imagineering, so let's call it Walt Disney Imagineering. And so we got new business cards.
And it was a term that Walt used, right?
Yeah. He called everybody there Imagineers because he saw people there being able to do a lot of different things. I guess that's why Marty and Randy liked me, is they wanted somebody who... They want experts, but they also want people that can bridge the gaps.
Sure.
And I was somebody who could be in creative but understand the technical and what it takes to get things done. And that's what Imagineering was. Granted, it was a smaller beast by the time after Epcot ended and we went through a lot of layoffs. Mm-hmm. At the peak, we were 2,700 people, I guess. And by the time Michael and Frank came in, we were down to 404.
Wow.
And basically that became the theme park business because everybody that was working there and left started forming companies to do it for other people. And look at it now. There's all kinds of there's a lot of little businesses that are all former Disney Imagineers.
Yeah. Now, one of the things they asked you to do was start researching simulators for the theme parks. I'm curious, when they gave you this project to start researching simulators, did you have any idea what property they wanted to?
But this was 1985 1984.
Okay.
And I was working on Circle Vision. I was a show producer for the American Journeys project at Disneyland. And Randy calls me down to the office one day and says, I want you to go research simulators to see if we can use them in a theme park attraction. They had no idea if it would work. Nobody did.
Yeah.
Never been done before.
Yeah.
So basically it was, while working on this, I was going to go play with simulators. There was a cheap one up at Pier 39 Duran had put together where they put a camera on a roller coaster, and it was like a 2-seater thing. You wanted to throw up afterwards.
Yeah.
Eventually flew an F-16 down at El Toro without flying it. Flew a helicopter at the Marine Corps Air Station down here in Tustin. I don't do very good at helicopters. It took me 5 times to get the thing successfully off the ground. Also, at one point, we went to Florida for another project, but it related because we went to a GE facility where they had a tank simulator. Out of that, in 84, after a few months, I wrote a memo, and I wish I'd kept it. It's basically that said, yes, I thought we could use simulators, and pointed out there's 2 paths we can go down. Path 1 is admit it's a simulator in Tomorrowland, showing off technology and take everybody on a flight on a simulator, but a glitch gets into the system and you end up flying different places and having crazy things go on. Path 2 is go down the fictional route where it's a vehicle of some kind, probably flying, and we have to suspend that disbelief. And I wrote the whole thing. If we want to do this, we need to set up that you see this vehicle you're going to be in a maintenance bay, or if it's a flying thing, and like you're going through a maintenance bay or a passenger terminal, and then you board the vehicle, never being made aware that it's a simulator. And I used an analogy saying, when you go to an airport, you don't know that you're getting on a plane.
Sure.
You're going through this thing where you're boarding, going through a process. There's all this other stuff going on. You go down to your gate, and when you get to the gate and you're admitted, when you're out there by the gate, you're looking out these big windows where you're seeing all the activity going on. Well, those windows aren't windows. They're giant rear projection screens, and that's all model work done in film. And when you go to board the plane, you go down this long tube. Well, you get inside this big cardboard tube, essentially. All those windows are essentially TV monitors, so you really don't fly. It's all a simulator.
Yeah.
And then I'd also held a little story contest where people sent in all kinds of story ideas, some of them pretty wild, some of them Star Wars. I ended my memo by saying, I think what would really be cool, we didn't have any contract, would be if we took a ride on the Millennium Falcon, and when we got off, we went into the Mos Eisley Cantina. This was 1984.
Yeah.
What are we doing now?
Yeah. I will say I recently rode Millennium Falcon. I prefer Star Tours. I got to be honest.
Well, I think they each have a different. I've ridden both.
Yeah.
Now. I was the pilot in the right-hand seat the first time, and then I was the gun. Then the second time, it was just me, so I decided to be a gunner. I was a manual gunner, though the rest of the thing was automatic. I did better. As a pilot, myself and the person in the left seat, we weren't very good. Though I did do okay on sending it into hyperspeed.
Yeah.
I think the simulation on the Millennium Falcon works a little better in terms of the motion because it only seats 6, so it's a lighter simulator.
Sure.
But yeah, out of that came that, and then I finished projects, and eventually a deal was made when they showcased a bunch of different ideas, including the simulator idea. Michael loved it, and he loved the idea of Star Wars, and I guess he got a hold of George, and they made a deal.
But before that, I've always heard the story about the black hole possibly being...
There were black holes, but it never really... They'd done some black hole concepts before I went to WED.
Okay.
Well, the film sucked.
Yeah.
So, no, those died before I went over there.
Okay.
And then there was one thing that I worked on. They were thinking for the Imagination Pavilion that I developed, and Joe Rohde was the artist, and I called it the Imaginarium, and it was very abstract. But eventually they made the deal with George, which led to eventually Star Tours. And once the deal was made, a bunch of us were put in rooms that come up with storylines. And the original storyline, Tom Fitzgerald pulled it together as the writer, was what became Star Tours. But when they handed it to me and I timed it, I said, this is an 11-minute experience, not counting load unload.
Yeah.
And by then, the engineers guys had started working out timings and things like that, and issues like I knew when you boarded the simulator, it has to essentially be turned off, the mechanical parts, because you can't have any danger of the hydraulics hiccuping or something.
Sure.
So it's in what's called the down position. And so my mantra was, whatever we do, everything has to tie into story, or the story, whatever's going to physically happen, the story has to deal with.
Yeah.
Which is why you have this whole load-unload thing, and it's powered off, and the ramps have to have time to go away. And it was filmed back then, so the projector actually had to start up, so there could be nothing on the screen. I have a minor irkness with the new one in that, okay, you didn't have to worry about startup on the film, so why couldn't you put some kind of cycle of a frame so you didn't have to have this whole blast door thing going on?
Yeah.
But that's my opinion.
Yeah.
I do like the new version.
Yeah, I like it a lot as well. I do wish that we could have like kind of a throwback to the original every once in a while.
It won't stand up, I think, unless they really rework it, because it was done all film.
Yeah, I know, which is what I kind of loved about it. Like, it looked
a lot of models,
great, yeah.
More passes on the optical printer than the one in the Return of the Jedi that had set the record, because they're long takes.
Yeah.
That was interesting. We had a big meeting after the story had pretty much been worked out, but still we hadn't done anything beyond some story sketches, etc. And so there was a big meeting with George and a couple of his people from ILM, Marty, Randy, Tom Fitzgerald, myself, and we were talking about how to make this film. During the discussion, I kind of kept my mouth shut for a while, and Dennis Muren was talking to George, yeah, we could cut to this angle and cut to that angle, and I'm getting the hair on the back, because I understood the hair on the back of my neck's going up, because I understood how simulator needed to work. There couldn't be a cut.
Mm-hmm.
Though later people thought it was okay. I still have a problem with it, just because you're doing a simulated journey, and come up with a device to cut, which is hyperspace.
Yeah.
Or don't cut to a different angle, because it won't work.
Yeah.
Well, Dennis kept talking about cutting different angles, and I'm like, this guy's wrong. I know he's won a lot of Academy Awards, but he's wrong. So I finally stood up. We were in a circle out at the Tahunga facility. We'd looked at some stuff, and I said, hold it, wait a minute, you don't understand. There can be no cuts visible. This is one long continuous take, and I'm looking right at Dennis. Think about it. We're looking out a window, just like you would look out at the front window of your car. How do you cut to a different angle?
Yeah.
And Dennis sat back, and here I am out in the middle of everybody making a big show of myself, and nobody said anything. And Dennis sat back, and he basically said, George, he's right. Oh, this is going to be a challenge. I was actually confronted by Randy the next day in the Gold Coast. He said, do we really have to make it continuous take? I said, if you want it to work, yes, Randy.
Yeah. It's, I know you worked on this other attraction. I'm going to go on a tangent here real quickly. And there's something that drives me nuts similar to that. So I know you had nothing to do with it, but with T2 3D at Universal. It always drove. I love T2 3D.
Yeah,
I think it's a phenomenal.
I was not through the whole thing. I just did concept.
But you know exactly what I'm going to say, right?
When you cut to a different angle, you have to think about it.
The beginning and end, it's bookended with you're in this theater space, and it makes sense. But then there's this whole middle section that's like watching a Terminator movie. Yeah, that makes zero sense.
That's what they did, and whatever. And that was so James Cameron and Arnie could go off and do what they did, and it's okay. I mean, the thing people care about there is that was sort of the story action port for everything to come back and all the stuff to come up in the theater and threaten people, Terminators and all that stuff.
But yeah, no, that was, Star Tours. Star Tours was a real game changer. I am curious though. This was the first, I believe, non-Disney property to be put into a theme park.
It really was. Captain EO was produced by Walt Disney Productions under a deal with Lucasfilm.
Yeah.
George got money for every attraction in every park. So like Star Tours eventually ended up in 4 parks, and for each one he got money. Yeah. In a way, this is saving Disney money, because now that they own Lucasfilm, they don't have to pay.
Exactly. But so I'm curious, like at Imagineering or just around the company, was there, did people have like a strong feeling about what are we doing bringing this non-Disney product?
To be honest, as much as Tony says he was instrumental in it, he kind of didn't want it in Tomorrowland because he felt it was violating Disney. But that was about it. Most of the people, we were all Star Wars fans.
Sure.
And we thought this was cool. And George always wanted Disney to have it. And most of us felt that should have been a Disney film from day one because it really was that kind of a film. It was impactful. Most of us didn't have a problem if they did. I didn't never hear too much from anybody after initial couple things. To be honest, Disney Studios didn't have anything that would work.
Yeah.
By then, they were producing live-action films that were more people-driven things, doing the films with Bette Midler and Robin Williams and stuff. And animation needed time to get going. Mm-hmm. And even at that, the films they did eventually that were the big hits, The Little Mermaid, Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, and them, none of them really relate to a simulator.
Sure.
So I think it was fine, and I still feel it was fine. And I kind of take umbrage at those who think, well, it's not Disney. Yes, it is.
It is now, for sure.
Well, and it opened in 1987. That was 32 years ago, people. And I take umbrage at the ones who don't like the Pixar stuff. Well, it's not Disney. You do know that Pixar was started, and a lot of the key artists who led the creativity were the first graduates of CalArts animation program. By the way, CalArts was founded by Walt Disney for that reason.
Yeah.
So what's your problem? Get over it.
Do you have a feeling about Galaxy's Edge in Disneyland Park?
No, I think it's cool.
Did you feel like you were in Disneyland when you were there? That was my biggest thing. I was like, I don't feel like I'm in Disneyland.
But that was the idea. You want to be on another planet, and I think that's really cool. In some ways, it's like what they did with Cars Land. When you're in Cars Land, you're in Cars Land.
Yeah.
That's it. I think for Disney to stay on top, they need to do things like that. So that's what Universal's doing. Have you been to Walt Disney World?
Oh, yeah.
Have you been to Florida's Universals? Mm-hmm. Have you seen Diagon Alley?
Oh, yeah.
Need I say anything more?
I mean, I'm 1,000% convinced that Galaxy's Edge wouldn't exist if it weren't for Wizarding World of Harry Potter.
I think that really stepped it up.
Yeah, it changed everything.
They'd been looking, I know, at various Star Wars land-type concepts, and originally it was going to go into DCA.
Oh, okay.
The thinking was, we'll put it over there someplace. But as they were developing it and looking at different options, there's space at DCA that is not as big, especially after they built Cars Land. Mm-hmm. And the feeling was that if they're going to do something based on Star Wars, they needed it to be bigger for a lot of different reasons. And really wanted it to be a land because they wanted things to be more experiential where they could. In some ways, that's why the Tower of Terror got turned into Guardians of the Galaxy. If you think of Guardians of the Galaxy, it's a little bit more experiential than it was with Tower of Terror at Disney California Adventure. I always called the Tower of Terror at California Adventure Tower of Terror Light.
Yes.
A little bit of a setup, then you get on a thing that goes up and down real fast. Yeah. The one in Florida, you get it's more of an attraction.
Yeah.
With Guardians of the Galaxy, they took the existing layout, but they made it into an attraction so that the fake elevator thing is part of the show now, not just a drop.
Yeah.
And I like what they did with that. And now it's going to be more involved in that it's going to have the whole Marvel experience tied into it.
Yeah.
And I think that's fine. I think things might have been a little different had the city of Anaheim and a couple of hotel owners on Harbor Boulevard had not been idiots. Mm-hmm. So they could build the eastern parking structure.
Yes. Yeah.
And then that land where all the bus stops are was going to go into DCA.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah, they're in a little bit of a predicament in Anaheim with the locals.
It got better in that there was a hotel owner who owned the hotels on both sides of the one that Disney bought, who rabble-roused a lot, and then the council got changed to where they, let's face it, got more like Disney should pay for everything no matter what. And the other thing that was a hitch was the hotel owner was insisting that if they build the bridge, he wouldn't fight it as much, but they had to guarantee for infinity and beyond that the sidewalk entrance would be there. Well, no company's ever going to agree to anything for infinity and beyond. Yeah. It's their land. They want to be able to do something with it. At the same time, as they said, we're always going to want to welcome people into our park, so that it'll be there.
Yeah.
So I think somebody tried to take advantage of it and frankly lost.
Yeah. Going back to Star Tours, I'm curious who came up with that name, because that's kind of genius.
We were calling it Star Tours essentially from the get-go,
really?
The fictitious company. But it took a while because Michael seemed to think you had to have the word ride in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
that is that drives me crazy.
No, this is absolutely true.
Wow.
For the longest time, he kept saying we had to call it Star Rides. And we had the graphics, et cetera, that we developed to a certain point that said Star Rides, but we all had in our, Tom held it in his pocket. No, it can't be that.
Yeah.
And we have to call it Star Tours. And at one point early on in recordings, we had to record it as Star Rides. And
wow.
It drove us all nuts. But eventually, far enough out from getting done that he saw, it shouldn't be called Star Rides. He understood it. And it got changed to Star Tours, at least far enough out that we didn't have signage that was made wrong or anything like that. So it took a bit of effort to make him understand.
That's so funny because I feel like I feel like Marty Sklar used to say this a lot, but like we don't make rides, we make attractions.
Right.
But then of course I'm wearing a Great Movie Ride T-shirt now. And
that's gone now.
I know, but there's a lot of they put the word ride in a lot of their titles, so I always thought that argument was crazy. So to hear that Star Tours was supposed to have the word ride in it, I think
now the only
wild.
Attraction that has the word ride in it is Mr. Toad.
Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Is there
and
no
it makes sense.
Right now? Yeah.
None.
Yeah.
That one's gone.
Yeah. Stuff. Rest in peace. Great movie ride. I love that ride. And
Attraction.
Sorry. I love that attraction. So you had mentioned George Lucas was obviously on these meetings and such, but how involved really was he?
He was very involved because he didn't really come down as much because the film was being made up there at ILM. We were responsible for, obviously we were involved in looking at, they did animatics. We looked at them, we critiqued them in a positive way. We had to find the voice of Rex. I did, actually. I was the casting director. We had to design the space, and part of my whole mantra when I was on the project, even though I was ostensibly responsible for all the media showing up, et cetera, including all the video stuff, but others shot it. But one of the reasons I was on it is because I understood simulators. So I said, we have to make sure that this space helps you buy into the willing suspension of disbelief, which is a film theory. And so the whole space was designed just like I had outlined in the memo. We went through a maintenance bay. We saw a ship being worked on that we could have R2 and C-3PO in there was an added touch. We came up with the concept of let's put fake commercials up there of Star Tours. And so I produced those. We made the screen out of something called Talic squares, which could go opaque or clear. It was an interesting project, a lot of little technical things, and just a lot of little touches that people would just add without dealing. Nobody thought about it. A lot of the stuff you saw down below was all just junk bought at a junkyard that Chris Dietz went out to and just got. Just did it. We were very comfortable with it, but there was still some unsureness of it about a year out. And then we had a open house. Families get to come in. My wife could never go in, neither could my kids, but we had one where we could bring them in and kind of show off stuff. And we decided to make that a test. So we had a temp print made of where we were on the film. We would have people come into the building where we housed the simulator that we'd been playing with.
Was this in Glendale?
Yes.
Okay. In
the parking lot. The Butler building put up just for that.
Okay.
And so we'd have them come in, have to go up a ramp because this was all just thing, get on board, close it up, let them ride it. Then when they would exit, we'd have them come down and stand in an area where they could actually watch the box.
Yeah. Which I've never done, which I actually really want to do.
Well, we didn't know. Yeah. There was still a debate, believe it or not, even though I was on the side of, no, you don't want to give it away, but they thought it would be cheaper if we could show it was a vehicle and we didn't have to hide it.
Yeah.
There are people about saving money. And people saw it moving, and the upshot of most people seeing that thing when it moves, because it's quite a bit, said we wouldn't ride it if we'd seen it first.
Okay, that's interesting. I was wondering.
Yeah, overwhelming. Like 80% of the people, we surveyed them and said, if I had known it was moving that much, I would not have gotten on board.
I had a similar experience with Forbidden Journey at Wizarding World, where I saw like behind the scenes video of the Kuka arm and stuff, and I was actually like quite scared. I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. Yeah. And I convinced myself to do it, and thank goodness I did. It's one of my favorite rides.
Yeah, it's essentially a forklift arm on a moving thing.
Well, it moves a lot, but that's interesting because you see the Star Tours room vehicle as you're walking into it, and I've always,
but with the black light, you don't know it's a simulator.
But I've always wanted to stand out there and watch it move.
You get hit.
Yeah, is it? Wow, it moves around that much in that.
Well,
little space.
when you in the original version, when you pitched forward because you made the wrong turn and go into the maintenance bay,
sure,
the screen is about 7 feet off the floor.
Okay.
It goes down that much, which means, of course, the back end's way up in the air.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild.
It tips that much.
Now, you obviously had to test the film with the movements.
We did a lot of that.
How nauseous. I mean, that must have been some rough work.
There was times it would go out of sync, and if you're smart, you just close your eyes. Of course, we had a button that if it was really bad, we'd just hit it and it would disable it.
Yeah.
Feeling that the simulator, the ride vehicle was a character, Tom Fitzgerald and I sat down and talked about, well, who should be the programmer out of show programming? And we decided that Eric Swap would program it because he was just kind of had the personality. So he was the show programmer the first time around, and he got into it. He loved to ride motorcycles and stuff. So we figured, okay, this is the guy that should be the vehicle.
Yeah. What was it like the first time you went into, hyperspace?
Well, it was a process of, part of it is how much can the actual simulator do when they're doing airplane simulators to simulate flight for pilots.
Mm-hmm.
They always do the initial thrust, but because they don't know what the pilot's going to do next, they have to very slowly get it back to the zero axis so it could go anywhere.
Sure.
Which was an interesting thing to find out about, and we had to think about that. And we had to think about that, okay, if we do this, what are we doing next? Because you can't just suddenly decide you're going to be diving down.
Yeah.
So part of the planning had to be for what's the movement got to take and what can the system do.
Yeah. And that's, you just talking about the system, that's not an attraction that breaks down all that often.
There's limits on the system, and they're put in place. And one of the things that was programmed into it is, well, when it hits a limit, it's going to just stop for whatever reason. There's a lot of things that come into play that essentially turns the hydraulics off, and then it just goes down all the way, just like when you're bored.
Yeah.
And we hit it a few times.
Yeah.
It would just, we're going along, hey, feeling good. Ooh, okay, what happened? And they'd have to do some analysis, and they'd have to do some reprogramming. And they, even after the attraction opened, they had to go down and slightly turn it down because we were also very concerned about barf factor. How many times are people going to throw up? And you didn't want them throwing up every ride.
Yeah.
And I think it eventually got down to less than one an hour or something like that.
Okay. Success. Yes.
And Tom Fitzgerald can have bad motion sickness, so he was kind of if it was making him feel nauseous, you knew we had to back it off. So
Now, you had mentioned you had to hire the voice of Rex, and I'm curious, were you a Pee Wee Herman fan or a Paul Rubens fan, or did you just
nobody knew who he was back then, really.
Was Pee Wee not around at that point?
Well, he was in comedy clubs.
Okay. He was still doing the
That's all he was doing. Pee Wee's Great Adventure and Pee Wee's Playhouse hadn't really come out yet.
Okay.
And we didn't know what the voice was. I mean, this is a new character.
Sure.
What's the voice? And we kept talking at it, and then we'd bring different people in to try it. Some of the classic cartoon character type voices. Frank Welker came in. Actually, I had B.J. Ward come in and do a squeaky thing. Several others. We brought in Billy Barty to do it just because he had kind of a voice, but he wasn't manic enough. But we had a couple people at WED try out, and several of them we kind of felt good out. We sent them up to George, says, that's not it. So part of my as a casting director, I would go see movies once in a while, just, okay, there's a voice on it. And I went to see Flight of the Navigator.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I saw it.
I didn't
right over
realize
here. Where the movie theater used to be over here versus now. And I'm going, who is that voice?
Wow.
And I didn't recognize it, particularly the second part of it when it goes nuts. And so I waited and watched the credits. Says, okay, somebody named Paul Rubens. I didn't know who it was.
Yeah.
I go in the next day and I see Tom. I said, Tom, drop what you're doing. Why? Go see this movie. Here's the times. Well, what? No, just go see it.
Yeah.
The voice of the ship is our Rex. You should just go. So he did. He went and saw the movie. He comes back and goes, book him, Mark.
That's awesome.
So we eventually got a hold of Paul, And he was on the set of Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Okay.
And he agreed in principle that he thought it would be interesting to do. And eventually he got paid, and one of the things was he was going to get a silver pass as long as his voice was used somewhere. I think he still gets it because I think that's his voice in the new thing.
Yeah. Well, even in Galaxy's Edge, yeah.
Yeah, well, when they did 2.0, I thought, well, they're finally going to take him out, so he'll lose his pass. And then they kept the droid in the queue. So, okay, he gets it. That's funny.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's become really, that character is, people love that character.
So we brought him in, and he did the first recording, and we had to pay for it. We didn't have to give him the pass if we didn't use it.
Sure.
Sent it up to George, and George loved it, and he became the voice of Rex.
Were there any big hurdles you had to get over, or things that George Lucas was like, no, really, don't do this?
Not that I know of. He was generally for it. We weren't going to do anything like with the characters. This was sometime after Return of the Jedi.
Okay.
It's supposedly safe in the galaxy, so these touring companies had sprung up. And then, of course, while you're out there, you find out there's still remnants of the Empire out there. Now, of course, it's the First Order.
Now it's all over the place.
30 years later.
Storyline-wise.
Yeah.
But, so memories of opening day. I mean, I hear those stories.
I'm going to go back before opening day. Several months out before opening, but we were getting close. One final phase is we wanted to see how people would react to it. So we decided we would open it up for a couple hours one morning.
In the park. In the attraction building.
Yeah. We were only a few months out from being able to be done.
Sure.
We thought. And so George flew down. And I'm out in the pre-show space because I'd had to give Davey Fighton some programming info on those weird commercials. Mm-hmm. And this guy walks in, and he's staring at the commercials and goes, yeah, I like the way those are done. And then I realized it's George. Oh, thank you. And then others finally realized there he was. So we wrote it, and then they opened it up, and people came in for a few rides. We only had one or two cabs. Well, I think only one because we didn't have really good prints. We rode it once with some people, got off. And what was interesting in the first thing, as we were getting off, one guy comments, can you imagine how many miles of track Disneyland had to build underneath the park to make this ride work?
What?
Yeah, I'm like, okay. Well, then we stuck around because we wanted to hear other reaction, if there was anything that was concerned, etc. I'm the only one wearing a name tag, right?
Yeah.
And so people were coming off another one. Some guy sees me, and he figures, okay, I had shorter hair. And he sees me, he goes, hey, comes up to me, and I can see George and Marty and Randy and everybody kind of hovering. Tell me something. What's that? You don't really go anywhere, do you? Oh, that's cool. So that success.
Yeah.
To me, that was okay. And at that point, I figured, okay, it's just a question of really getting it done. Though oddly enough, we were ready to open, and Michael and the company didn't want to open. They wanted to get Captain EO done first.
Oh, wow.
And they'd said this a while back, so we kept saying Star Tours in spite of EO. So Star Tours could have opened up in 86.
Wow. So it was ready.
It was done.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, I mean, Star Tours is still an epic attraction in the park today, and many parks today, which is, I mean, incredible to think that it's lasted that long, even with a new land.
Yeah. I think it still works. I thought it was interesting. Randy's idea was that, kind of like what we did with Bear Country and we've done with Circle Vision, was let's eventually do another couple of films, go to other planets, put them in the different cabs so you never get the same show. The idea was to do a new film every 3 years to add to the library.
Sure.
Up until 2010, it was the same show.
It's crazy. I wish it was available on DVD somewhere.
And we never did get to Endor.
That's true. We never did. So after Star Tours, I'm going to go through these real quickly because there's another attraction you started working on that we need to talk about. But after Star Tours, you did some work with the Living Seas Pavilion and Wonders of Life Pavilion, which meant you probably worked on Body Wars.
Frank Armitage was working on it, and he'd worked on Fantastic Voyage, and there were so many models built. And he said, do you think we could do a ride through the human body in a simulator? And I said, I guess. I'm not sure how we would know which way is up. Why don't we do a test? Mm-hmm. So we organized a test where David Jones, who's the video guy, we shot the models with POV, like a periscope lens, etc., and put together a test. And they came out and said, yeah, we could do it. And the team started writing a script. Part of the problem I had with it, and I was doing a lot of other small film-oriented projects for Randy at the time, is I said, this is long, and you need to cut it down. And that was, I think, ultimately one of the problems with Body Wars. And then the studio folks got involved, said there's not, and I said the same thing, what's your hook? And they got involved and kind of reworked it a bit, got Leonard Nimoy to work on it and direct some live action stuff to add in an element. Of course, the problem was by then a lot of the simulator stuff had been done, so you had to kind of put it on top.
Yeah.
It sort of worked, but they also had the same problem, which, as I said, which way is up? Mm-hmm. And they had a bigger puke factor because nobody could figure that out.
Now, you've obviously done quite a bit of voice casting because you did a lot of the voice casting matches for Great Movie Ride.
Yeah.
And I got to ask, just because I'm a fan, I hear the story is it's Liza Minnelli doing Judy Garland.
I don't know all of them because I wasn't involved. In some of them, they would pick their own people.
Okay.
But when it was, they weren't sure. Like they used recordings of Gene Kelly. Mm-hmm. Clint Eastwood said nothing, so you didn't have to cast him. We had two that were a problem: Jimmy Cagney and John Wayne. Cagney, we kept trying people, and we'd send it off to his widow. And I wish I could remember the name of the voice. But we've got one, and well, he's pretty good. Let's send it, and it would get sent to the widow. And she actually called, and I'm listening to her with the lady who was overall dealing with these celebrities. And so I had to stop the car and call you right away. Okay. I was listening to it. Yeah. I thought Jimmy was talking to me directly. Okay, we got that one solved. John Wayne was challenging because John Wayne, a lot of people do like Rich Little stuff, impressions, but it's not really sounding like him as much as using the vernaculars. And we went through a lot of people, and I was dumbfounded. We even had a guy that the family had said use, and he did it. It didn't sound right. And I was at a little bit of a wit's end, and I was talking to one agent one time, bringing somebody in for a safety spiel re-recording. I think it was B.J. Ward's agent. He heard about what I was looking for. He says, I think I've heard of someone who does this. Well, who is it? No. He does it at parties, and he's really good. I think he could be right for you. Okay. But he's not my guy, but that's okay. All right. Send me the sides. So I sent him, which wasn't a lot.
Yeah. And
about a week later, I get a cassette back and it just says John Wayne demo. I put it in my player. And that really sounds good. And he was saying the line, and then he goes, Chad Everett for John Wayne. So the TV star, Chad Edward, became the voice of John Wayne for the Great Movie Ride.
Now, you guys couldn't just use the audio from the movies, mostly because they just weren't clean enough, right? I know there's probably
a lot of
rights
studios were not like Disney. Disney always kept separation soundtracks of dialogue, music, and effects. They always kept their stuff separate and preserved it. A lot of the other studios did not do that.
Yeah, that's what
and that was a problem, which unfortunately movie studios didn't understand. They had assets they should have kept going.
You did go on to work on Muppet Vision 3D, which was like the first 4D film of that kind, I think. But I want to talk
more than Captain EO by a long shot.
Yeah, and then that led to Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, which anybody listening to this show regularly knows I'm obsessed with the Honey, I Shrunk franchise. And
I'm going to try not to disillusion you too much.
I know, because you didn't work on it very long. You ended up leaving.
I left partly because of that.
But because of Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. Okay, now I need to hear this story.
The Honey, I Shrunk the Audience was going to replace Captain EO.
Yes.
The attendance was faltering. They wanted to keep it going. And the concept was developed, and I was on it. Originally, I'd come back from working on Euro Disney, which I'd gotten drafted onto, and then was working on the redo of The Golden Dream, but also working on this. It got developed, and I was involved, and we were putting a lot of fun stuff in. It was a great concept. Then we did a meeting, and this was before I flew down for the installation of Golden Dream, with Frank and Michael. During that meeting, Frank had revealed that the next year he was going to not renew his contract. Mm-hmm. I'm going, oh, God. Michael without Frank, I didn't think it would be very good. And I could already see how Imagineering was getting more corporate-like. And I'd been there a long time. And so out of that review, which was the concept of what you saw was what was in that meeting with Michael and Frank. They loved it, but they said, do it without the in-theater effects.
Do Honey, I Shrunk the Audience without the in-theater effects?
Yes.
Well, they obviously lost that battle.
Well, no, that's what they said. And I'm like beside myself because I know the film without those effects, why bother?
Yeah.
So I actually went back to my office, and I went to Tom Fitzgerald, who was my boss, and said, this won't work. We need to rewrite the script. I'm going to have somebody rewrite the script so it works as a standalone film.
So they just wanted a movie for people, a short film
That's
for people to go watch.
That's what they thought.
Okay.
That was the thinking. And I was like, and Tom said, no, we're just going to produce the film. And, you're going to be the media producer. And I was going to be going to Florida in a few days, maybe to go to Golden Dream. And I said, I don't think I can produce this because it's not, to me, a successful attraction without the in-theater effects. And we'd already done a mock-up and everything.
Yeah.
We're building a mock-up, etc. And basically I was saying I would not do it without saying it. But a few days later, I get called into Tom's office. Basically, well, he wanted to get rid of me, but Marty wouldn't let him. So he said, I think we need to find a way to part. And so we negotiated out. I had 30 days.
Wow.
So
okay. There's so much
what's
there.
ironic? What's ironic is they got the film kind of done.
Yeah.
And they looked at it, and then Michael realized they couldn't do it without the in-theater effects. But nobody would stand up to him and say that. So what would have cost $10 million ended up costing $15 million to put it all in.
I mean,
from what I hear,
that's insane.
Well,
that's crazy.
I don't always make people happy because I'm a very blunt person. When I feel strongly about something not working, sometimes there's people that don't like me for that, and I understand that. Mm-hmm. But I'm also passionate about what makes something work. It's like for Star Tours, had to be a continuous take or it would not work.
Yeah.
Or you had to figure out a way to hide them. Hyperspace hides one. Others are hidden within there's one in the comet scene. When you're going through the ice cave, there's actually a cut when you bam through the ice shield. To go
yeah.
That's a cut.
Yeah.
It's easy to hide. You can hide it if you plan it properly. Well, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, I felt the same way. Look, just say something to Michael. He'll listen. The one critique I have of Imagineering and the way it had gotten was didn't really understand the culture of these people want you to debate them. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the paramount culture that Michael and Jeffrey had all brought in. And I was willing to stand my ground, but my bosses were not willing to let me do it. And I just said, okay, I felt like I was done.
Yeah.
And so initially it was, whatever. And then Marty said, no, give Mark. Marty's the one that actually said, let's have Mark stick around for 30 days while you negotiate, and maybe he can find something else to do within Imagineering or within Disney. And so I was not escorted out that day.
Wow. So
imagine that.
So when you saw the final product of Honey, I Shrunk the Audience,
I thought they did a good job.
It's what you essentially were fighting for.
Right. One of the problems I felt with the attraction was Rick Moranis was trying to distance himself, so they only had like a week of shooting with him. Mm-hmm. That's why they had to come up with the contrivance of the other stuff to be able to work him in and out. So it was him in miniature, blue screened into the big stuff.
Sure.
And I thought, well, that worked to a certain point. I don't think it stood as good a test of time because they should have really thought through everything better. They were more concerned. That's the studio mentality. They were concerned with the star and the actor than they were with the story and the attraction.
Yeah.
And I think that was to the detriment of it. You look at Star Tours, the attraction was made to work.
Yeah.
Captain EO was a Michael Jackson driving thing.
I mean, I feel like that today we're in that problem, especially where like there's celebrities getting into trouble because of 10-year-old tweets and stuff. And
I had predicted that, nobody really knew what was going on with Michael. And I just said, you're opening yourselves up to, everybody knew celebrities, some of them, not all of them, did things that were not necessarily things you wanted to be associated with. And at the same time, a celebrity's nice initially, but it needs to become the character.
Yeah. And
Cranium Command, it kind of worked because they ended up with celebrities doing stuff. Mm-hmm. That's cool and all that. But again, it has to be the right person for the character. That's why, the Pixar folks get it. Yeah, they use name stars for voices, which a lot of voice actors don't like. Mm-hmm. But it's the right voice for the character.
Sure.
Otherwise, no.
Yeah. No, it's just interesting to me because, look at somebody like Chris Pratt, who's huge right now and a great guy. But who knows what his past might hold.
But at the same time, he's a character.
Sure, but I don't think
Maybe.
in this overly sensitive world, I think Mission Breakout would be in trouble, and the new Jurassic World ride, which he is in as well.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. I think it could, but I think in Guardian of the Galaxy, it works to a certain extent. And if you think about it, the only one that you see is really him is Chris Pratt. The other characters are so
under makeup,
whatever. It's that they're still the characters, but they made those characters work.
Yeah,
I agree. It's an issue. But at the end of the day, if Tom Hanks was suddenly to be some wacko that we never knew over his long career, Woody would live on.
Yeah.
Tim Allen has had problems in the past.
Yeah.
Well documented, yet he's still Buzz Lightyear.
Yeah. I think it's different when you're just the voice. I think it makes it a little bit easier for people. But so when you were working on Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, obviously you were there for the development of the story and such. But I'm kind of curious when it comes to something like that. I'm going to assume cast has to be put in place before you guys even develop a story. Because as you said, Rick Moranis was kind of leaving showbiz at that point.
That was one of the issues, was how much, as the storyline and the script was being developed, you'd gotten back to us that he wasn't going to be available a lot. So that script was written. What you saw, it was done with the idea that Rick was going to have to be a guy on a blue screen, so he's in miniature for a lot of it.
Yeah,
I thought it was contrived a little bit.
I got to be honest, as an audience member, I never thought it felt
That's just
weird.
My feeling. But I felt it was believable enough that you could buy it.
Sure.
And I understood the logic for it. I thought it would have been more interesting had they not done that and then I think the attraction would have worked longer. It also became an attraction that from a maintenance standpoint, the rat whips became a problem for maintenance. And that's, to me, I've unlike some Imagineers who get it there for day one, then forget about it.
Yeah.
I was one who believed that you had to do things so they could be maintained or the attraction's not as good.
Yeah.
And I had felt that let's really think about how we're doing this. Could it be done with jets of air instead of little whips under the seat? Because you knew those were going to be pulled out, and they did.
Yeah.
I thought the dog sneeze was a great concept, a way to finish it too.
Yeah. I love the rumbling floor.
Yeah,
that was the big,
and that
thing.
Was the biggest expense. And that Rick Rothschild totally pushed for that, though it wasn't originally there.
When you say originally there, conceptually,
when they said get rid of the big cost for the special in theater effects was that.
Yeah, that was the game changer to me. I can remember as a kid.
I agree. I think that was going to make it work more believable than anything else.
Yeah. They could have removed every other effect, and I was still.
A lot of times I mean, it was accepted that not everybody would feel the rats.
Yeah,
but at one point it was like not very many people felt the rats at all.
Yeah, something interesting with that attraction is the introduction of the character Dr. Nigel Channing, played by Eric Idle.
Yeah,
that was the first time we met that character, right? And then he eventually became part of Imagination.
Right.
Was that always part of the plan?
Well, that's what eventually happened because they knew the ride. The Journey into Imagination, I know there's a lot of Disney fans that love that ride.
The original? Yeah.
But the fact is, nobody went on it.
Yeah.
And it was also a maintenance problem because that turntable was a disaster. Sorry, Disney fans, but nobody was going on the ride or the attraction at all. The one you see now was actually the second pass. Initially, Kodak wanted a new ride, and they did one. I never got to see it because it was only there for like a year, and it was so bad that they said they had to get
the one without Figment, right?
Not only the one without Figment, but the one without Eric Idle, et cetera, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was so bad, they said, okay, this doesn't work. We got to redo it again.
Yeah.
And so then they came up with that storyline. There's been talk of bringing back Figment and the Dreamfinder. And I know one of the Pete Docter, I think it was, said, how can you not have them there? But I know part of the discussion is turning that into some kind of Inside Out thing. Is what I've heard.
I've heard that, and I've also heard that Pete Docter won't allow that to happen.
I don't know.
And that's his film. So
it's his film. How much he can... I don't think they'll do it if he's not involved, but at the same time, they're doing the Twirly Roll ride at DCA.
I mean, that's a reskin of...
Yeah, no, I know that, and kids will love it. That's the thing, and it'll look great. I disagree about Pete Docter not allowing Inside Out. If Disney wants to do it, Pete will find a way to do it.
Yeah.
Now, if he can incorporate Figment into it, great.
Yeah. Because Figment's in that film. He has a little Easter egg in Inside Out.
Yeah. So he could do it, and to be honest, Figment never had a chance because here you had a new character that's an animated character that never had anything that it came from.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Disney fans, but you need some intellectual property if you're going to have something like a totally animated character come out of it.
I would disagree with you on that.
Okay, that's fine. But I just think it would, or it would have been great had there been a Figment series that came about a couple years later.
I think Disney Plus would be a great place for a Figment animated series.
Develop it as a character.
I also just think it's interesting how much they use the character for all the festival marketing and promotions at that park.
That's what I'm saying. If you want to use it in an attraction, great. Well, let's get a series going with Figment, maybe Dreamfinder, and have somebody really take it more fun and interesting. Because, to be honest, they were kind of stale. They weren't really, there was not a lot of character development.
Where do you think that change, though, was in mentality? Because that definitely changed, because for many, many decades, we had Pirates of the Caribbean, we had Haunted Mansion.
And Walt Disney.
So the difference was that Walt was involved.
Walt.
Okay.
He understood how to make things work in an attraction. And also think about it, Haunted Mansion and Pirates are generic concepts. It's pirates.
Sure.
It's ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, imagination. What is imagination? That one's
a little tougher.
A little tougher because it's not set.
Yeah.
There's no real world grounding. So again, I don't have a problem with the Dreamfinder or Figment as characters. But they're not very well developed.
Yeah.
In terms of what are their personalities.
Sure.
And if I remember the ride and go, well, okay, he's a mischievous character. Where's the mischief? So let's get Dreamfinder and Figment a TV series and give them a couple years so that some talents can really play with them, take them further, and then put them in the ride again.
Yeah. I would love that. I would love to see a Disney Plus series with Figment. I think that would be great.
I think that's got potential. I always felt that.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a blast talking Star Tours and Honey, I Shrunk the Audience in particular. I'm sorry that is the attraction that got you out of the company.
It's all right. I felt like I didn't know what else I could do there.
Sure.
And I also did not like the direction of the company that I could see it was going.
Yeah.
I felt at the time that Michael without Frank was not going to be good. And I felt there was a lot of compromising going on in terms of theme park attractions. And Lord, did it ever happen. And unfortunately, Frank did pass away the next year.
Mm-hmm.
And things just didn't get better. I mean, if you look at the stuff that was being made for the parks, I just felt like they lost their mojo.
Now, what do you feel about the state of it today? Is it something you'd be more interested in working in again if you were?
I'm beyond.
No, I know you're doing journalism now.
Well, no, I'm going to be 65. I don't know. I'm just going to write.
Sure,
but I felt when I thought they were kind of doing some interesting things for DCA, and then Cars Land. When the 3-day, I was covering Cars Land for the Orange County Register at the time, and it was a 3-day media whatever with that and some other things they were doing, and I was trying to cover a lot of different things, and I saw on the end of day 3, and it was hot, and I'm like, okay, I'm dragging by this point. I was actually coming back from Disneyland where I'd done something about the mountain climbers and the yodeler and the Voices of Liberty being over there, and I come back, and by then the park is just open. There's no special stuff going on. Yeah, the media center was back behind, and I basically wanted to go back and get the rest of my equipment and go home. And I see Bob Weiss, Kathy Mangum, and Kevin Rafferty, who I've known forever, right? And they see me, and they go, "Well, Mark, what do you think?" Bob says this to me, and I set my video camera down, and I go, "Bob, Kevin, Kathy, you really want to know what I think?" And Bob looks at the other two, and they're eating ice cream, and he goes, "Hang on a second." So they all take like a big lick of their ice cream cones, right? He goes, "Okay, we're ready." And I go, "Bob, Kathy, Kevin, I think Cars Land and Radiator Springs Racers will do for California Adventure what Pirates of the Caribbean and New Orleans Square did for Disneyland. Really put it on the map." And they were very happy to hear that, because I really think they did it. And I also said, I think it shows that Imagineering's got their mojo back.
Yeah, I think, obviously recently we got Galaxy's Edge, but before that, I think at the Disneyland Resort, as far as like overly detailed, overly themed lands go, Cars Land was, it.
They hadn't done anything like that with and well thought and executed well. And I think that really said, do it. Part of it, I'm going to give a little credit to Michael Eisner because he knew he was on his way up. And he'd rehired Bob Weiss back in Imagineering, and Bob was basically given an office, from what I understand, as a vice president, not really doing much of anything.
Yeah.
And reportedly, he told Bob Iger that whatever you want to do at the parks, let Bob Weiss do it. And so Bob Weiss was put in charge of the DCA thing and put together a team, and they came up with some great concepts. They were given a budget. They worked to that budget.
Yeah.
$1.2 billion for everything, and reinvented a park that was in severe need of reinvention.
And it seems like Cars Land is really just sticking around at DCA.
It's not going anywhere.
Not as far as going anywhere. I mean, not being replicated.
No, but it was more than that. It gave the park a grounding.
Yeah.
Buena Vista Street. You feel like you're going somewhere.
Great, yeah. Anyway, sorry, we've been talking and talking. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you very much.
I hope you all enjoyed that interview with Mark. I once again want to thank Mark for coming on the show. If you enjoyed this interview, it would mean a lot to me if you'd take a moment to head on over to your iTunes podcast app and leave a 5-star rating and review for Disney Coast to Coast. This really is a simple and free way to help support the show. Other than that, take a moment to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids this upcoming Sunday, June 23rd, by watching the movie, eating a big bowl of Cheerios, mowing the lawn, sitting silently and contemplating the genius of Rick Moranis, or celebrating in your own special way. I will be doing all of those things. Have a magical day, folks. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com.